This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, welcome to Undistracted. I'm your host, Laura Bennett, and this is the podcast where we learn from our guests how to get better at building our lives with intention around our passions, our purpose, and deal with some of the things that can get in the way of that. You can subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening. Find video versions of many of our conversations on the Hope 1032 YouTube channel. Today's conversation is about the impact of finances on the way we live, even how it affects our sense of identity, potential in the choices that we're making. We're joined by Rosie Kendall, the CEO of Christians Against Poverty Australia, who've just recently rebranded to Hope Economy, extending the work they're doing, helping people relieve financial pressure, loneliness, address the isolation that can come from financial challenges as well. In this conversation, Rosie points us towards some of the ways we can handle our money with a little bit more intention, and also speaks to what people are hoping to achieve when they reach out for financial support.
I'd probably frame it to say that I think that people reach out for support from Hope Economy because they're feeling overwhelmed, or they're feeling like they don't know what the next step is, or they're not sure how they're going to resolve their situation. And so, to be honest, I'm not sure that people come to us with, kind of a firm view of exactly what that looks like. But I do think that for many, many people that are struggling with their finances, actually, they can feel quite hopeless. And so I think what they're reaching out for is to have hope again with their finances. And so for the different people, that looks very different. So one of the first things that a church volunteer would do is actually ask kind of, what is your goals? Like, what do you want to achieve? Because for a single mom who's maybe in unstable housing, that can look very different to someone who's just retired and got an unstable income. So it's important that for each individual that comes, that we get to work that out together. Kind of, what is it? What's the journey that we're going on towards the place that will make them feel more hopeful in their financial situation?
When we know how much money kind of can do for us, you think of, yes, it meets our very practical needs of buying food, groceries, right now petrol, housing, etc. Is that what gives it so much power over that sense of hope we have, just because it's such an important mechanic in life? What's going on there that our money can determine our level of hope?
Yeah, and our whole well-being ultimately, I think you're right in that none of us can do anything without money. Kind of money is the ecosystem that we trade in. We get our accommodation and our food, and none of us are kind of excluded from that. And so there's this really practical element to money that means that if we don't have enough, or we're uncertain about it, then it can affect everything. It's not like we can compartmentalize and think, money's over there. It actually infiltrates or affects lots of elements of our life, and often with our money, it affects our relationships, and it affects the way that we interact or socialise with people, and can cause a lot of stress and anxiety, and often makes people withdraw from community, which means that a lot of people are facing financial struggle alone.
And that idea of having enough, that feels like it's a very subjective thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, within Australia, we live in a context in which most of us do have enough, but there are lots of people who are really struggling who don't have enough. And so it's a good thing for us to be grappling with, especially as Christians, to think, okay, well, God has given us enough to go around. And so how do we live authentically to share with people that don't currently have enough within our context? And I think that also, social media and the world around us is constantly telling us that we need more, and is constantly telling us that we need money for our security. And actually, Jesus does offer us another alternative story in which we can build our security in Him. And so that's a really hopeful message that we, as Christians, as a church, have to offer our communities.
Are we misguided in thinking that money can protect us from lacking something?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I think so. I think that the world would tell us that we need you could name a lot of things that the world tells us that we need. We need this car and we need this kind of house and we need something else that's going to make us happy. And I think that just within us, I know myself, recognise that it's kind of a pull to buy more things to make us feel satisfied. And I think that the gospel and Jesus' story tells us something very, very different to that. And so I think as Christians, it's good for us to be reminded of that and to talk about that. And so one of the other things that Hope Economy does is partner with churches to have good, healthy conversations around money and how do we disciple each other well in this journey of money, because it has so much to do with where we're putting our security and where we're putting our hope. And ultimately we live in a world that tells us a different story, so it's good for us to be grappling with that.
And there is a level of practical financial literacy that, of course, is really helpful. What are some of the typical causes of money struggles that you've seen that maybe, we can sort of learn to avoid or learn to get through?
Yeah, I mean, how long is a piece of string in terms of the different reasons or things that cause financial struggle? But I would say that you've got, as you've just said, kind of financial literacy or financial kind of skills in terms of people. They might have enough money, but they're not really sure how to manage that well. And so things like a budget and being able to make informed decisions ahead of time rather than kind of be reactive. Take, for example, if you've not got a budget and you're spending lots of money on a credit card, actually when you're making those decisions, you're not necessarily making informed decisions at the time. You're kind of being reactive and then you're dealing or having to look at that after you've spent rather than before. And the beauty of a budget is that you get to look at, okay, well, where do I want my money to go? And can I make kind of informed decisions? So there's that. But I think that for a lot of people that would reach out to formerly Christians Against Poverty, now Hope Economy, they would reach out to us because actually they've had a change of circumstance that was outside of their control. Maybe it's a marriage breakdown. Maybe they're fleeing because they don't feel safe at home. Maybe they've lost a job. Maybe they've gone through an illness. Often financial crisis occurs at the point in which something has happened outside of their control. And often, this is an intersection with life and money. We like to think we're probably more in control of things than we are. And so being able to have a safe place to talk about money, which ultimately I'd be a big advocate that the church should be a place that is a safe place for that, means that for people that are going through a financial difficult time for whatever reason, having a safe place to go, to know that there will be kind of some practical support on hand is just a really useful tool for our community.
Thinking of the cynical person for a moment, when you're talking about the church being a place that offers financial education, helps people with their finances, I'm sure some people would raise the question of what would the church teach about how much money should be given to the church? Like many of us would be familiar with the concept of tithing and generosity, offerings, all of these sorts of things. How do you manage that kind of dynamic there where you don't want, people in a vulnerable financial situation to potentially have messaging like that they may or may not know how to interpret? How do you deal with that kind of aspect of the conversation?
Yeah, well, I think that that's one of the arguments that an organisation like Hope Economy coming along this side of the church is really helpful, because we give training and equipping to church volunteers about how to have coaching, mentoring conversations that actually involve asking someone questions themselves and not telling someone what to do. And so them being equipped with the right resources and boundaries of what is a good way to have a conversation and what is not a good way to have a conversation is really helpful. Ultimately, I would probably say that churches are having these types of conversations, but having training and tools actually kind of means that churches can do that in a really confident way to know how to navigate conversations like that. And really as a general tool, it's asking questions rather than being formulaic, kind of actually, as I said earlier in the conversation about asking someone about their goals. One of the foundations of building a budget are actually, what are your values and what are you wanting your money to do? And for each of us, whether we're a Christian or not a Christian, our answer to that would be different, in that some of us, our families are really important, for some of us, church would be really important, and we're often balancing all these things that are important to us. And what would be really important in a conversation like that is actually identifying what is the person's values and how do we ask them the right questions to help their budget work for matching those things up.
One of the elements of the Christian perspective, we read in Scripture, the Bible tells us, not to let money be our master, that we shouldn't be subject to it more than we are subject to God. How do we do that when we kind of have to be, in a way, obedient to our budget? How do you then not let money be your master?
I would probably say that us ensuring that when we are making, if we talk money specifically, when we're asking or making decisions on our finances, to actually ask, okay, well, what would Jesus want me to do in this situation? So we know we have money and we need money, but actually what is our guiding kind of, who's forcing the decisions that we're making? So again, through biblical narrative, we want to be making decisions that are for good and for things that are maybe for the community or for our family. And if we recognise that within ourselves, maybe we're being driven by fear in our financial situation, or we're being driven by scarcity or other things that are kind of not maybe in line with the biblical story, then I think that would give us reason to think or to kind of meditate and say, okay, well, Jesus, what would you want me to be doing with my finances? So we know that money is something that we have. We can't kind of choose not to do that. But I do think that we can be bringing God and Jesus into our everyday decisions on how we spend our money.
And around that faith conversation with our finances, I mean, sometimes if you're somebody that's grown up in a Christian environment, you're familiar with the Christian world, there's often conversations where we talk about faith involving a bit of risk. We've got to trust sometimes beyond what might normally make sense to us. And there's a lot of stories of these kind of big dreamers that have these moments of like risking it all to go after that idea or that business, a career, something that they would consider to be this bold step of faith. What's your view on like risking it all, risking money for a dream?
Well, I wouldn't have a firm view in terms of, I think it depends on the person. I think it depends on what God said to them. I would be encouraging anyone that might have a big dream and thinking, okay, well, what am I going to do with this to get good people around them and for people to ask good questions together and for them to pray and discern, in that I think that there'd be lots of situations where actually God is asking someone to step out in faith and put their trust in him. And then there would be other situations that maybe that isn't right. So I think that it's really difficult to kind of put a blanket, yes, that's, the best thing to do or not. I think that actually discernment, wisdom and having the right people around you to make those kind of decisions is what I would recommend.
Yeah, some kind of sounding board sounds like a very good idea. If you were looking at somebody's finances and the way they were spending their money, what would be some signs for you that maybe they've got an issue with money?
Well, I mean, to be honest, we try and not take a view on being kind of judgmental on people's spending in that, also, we kind of need to make our own decisions. So I'd probably frame the question differently and want to ask individuals about, are they happy with their spending? Is there anything within their spending that they feel uncomfortable with or maybe doesn't align with their current value system? So if they are a Christian, then, might ask a question about how do you think that Jesus would feel about your current spending. But the idea would be to ask good questions to get people to reflect rather than have someone come in and be judgmental. I think that with our money in particular, we can have a lot of shame about how we might spend our money or feel like someone's going to judge us. And I think the kind of gift that the church can give is actually be really graceful in those situations and ask more questions and actually giving answers to help people consider or to have a framework for making good decisions rather than having someone telling them they're not doing a good job.
Okay, so is it more maybe then about like the attitude to spending? So like if you're somebody who's buying things and you just feel like it's in this really uncontrollable way, or maybe there's an addictive element to it, or you just feel like you're constantly like not able to get the numbers to line up, something like that. Is it more those sorts of things that indicate, hey, there's an issue here, as opposed to what somebody specifically may be using their money for?
Yeah, and I think that for different people, it would normally be things like, oh, I'm actually quite stressed about my money. I'm thinking money is becoming something that is, it's not serving me, and it's in terms of just getting through my day and my week, but it's actually becoming quite all-consuming. I'm thinking about spending money. I'm worried about where money's going to come from. I know that when that bill comes next week, I'm not going to be able to pay for it. I know that I've kind of spent above my means. The kind of anxiety that we feel around our money is a good indicator. And ultimately, at different stages, we all can probably think of times when we've been anxious about our money. And so our encouragement would be to have a conversation with someone about that. Ultimately, people can reach out to the Hope Economy website and be connected with a church that's ready to have a conversation with people about it. Because I think that our level of well-being or anxiety related to our money is a really good indicator on whether we need to be moving proactively towards that, because our heart would be that we don't want people to be anxious about their money, that our money should be there as a tool, and put in its kind of rightful place. And also conscious, there's a lot of people, even here in Australia, that don't have enough money or they're in really difficult housing situations, etc. And so having a community around them that can help fill the gap is also really important.
There's also a really big identity part here in the way we spend our money can inform that sense of identity, right? Like if you can
absolutely.
have nicer clothes, perhaps you think that means you're a more beautiful person. Or if you can live in a particular area, there's a status with that. There's so many ways where the way we spend money, it really does inform how we think about ourselves. Can we separate, our sense of identity from the way we spend money, or are they just like undeniably linked?
I think they are. I mean, they're certainly very, very linked, and that would be where good conversation around, if someone is feeling like they need to dress a certain way or live in a certain area, they're the kind of great conversations for us to have, and kind of normally they sit on a belief system or on where does my value come from, where is my identity. And for those of us that follow Jesus, our identity can come from him, and he wants to give us identity, and we are loved unconditionally by him. And so that can really help unlock some of our thinking around how we might spend our money. But ultimately, we can't do that on our own, and we all struggle with things like that. So it's not like, this is like, oh, we've got all the answers. Even myself, it's kind of good for me. Every week I do the job that I do, like it feels like I need reminding about where my identity is and to be just to have good, healthy conversations about actually how do I allow God to transform me, and as he transforms me, how do I then show that with the way that I deal with my money.
When you're digging into some of the belief systems that people have around their money, what do you think informs our ideas about how money should and shouldn't be used?
Well, I mean, I think if we talk globally, I think ultimately it's any belief system. So we all come from families, and so it might be the way that money was used in our households. It might be, as we've talked about, someone growing up in church and how they've seen money being used in that environment. But ultimately, any of our belief systems normally would affect the way that we are using our money. And so, I think that actually sometimes we might think that using money is a symptom or, it's kind of like in the here and now, but normally there's a whole belief system, if you think of kind of a root system that those decisions are coming from. And so it can be really helpful to look at those belief systems and think, okay, well, what's sitting underneath this decision? Why do I feel like I need this for this next step? And having someone to walk alongside you in that journey it can be really helpful. Sometimes it's really difficult to make those kind of discoveries on your own.
And I realise there's perhaps an inherent assumption in this conversation that people who are struggling with money are the ones that may be unable to pay bills, challenged with school fees, paying rent, whatever it might be. But can people who are affluent be actually struggling with money as well because of their attitudes toward it, or those belief systems like that need to have the car, the house, etc.? Is that a reflection of an issue with money just as much as maybe not being able to pay a bill is?
I think they're all things that, you wouldn't describe as financial well-being. I think that if money is not, it's causing us stress and anxiety, or actually we're struggling with how we spend our money and maybe feeling like we're spending money in the wrong places, these are all things that are kind of in the general bracket of struggling with our finances. And so, yeah, I mean, I actually think it's really important that we don't see it as a rich-poor kind of divide. Ultimately, we're probably at some level or at some time in our lives all going to have a wrestle with how we're spending our money. And therefore, actually, kind of we've all got something to learn from one another in this journey too. And so, yeah, I mean, I would definitely not make that assumption. I think that none of us are immune. And for any of us that have, maybe listening that have got more money or kind of feel like they're affluent, often that comes with, a higher mortgage and comes with a car, and actually you can get out of control with your finances quite quickly. And so we can find ourselves struggling financially kind of wherever we are on an income bracket, depending on what our outgoings are.
So then whoever you're talking to that will put themselves in that bracket of struggling, where would you normally say that a process of finding a way forward begins?
Well, it certainly begins with sharing our money stories with each other, kind of recognising that it's taken normally a long time to get to that point, kind of what are the different factors that have contributed to that. Is it things that happened in our households? Is it circumstances around us like job loss or marriage breakdown, family situations? Maybe it's an illness, kind of just really getting a good grasp of listening and like what are the different aspects in this story that are contributing to the current circumstances. And then quite quickly it's having a conversation about goals. So, okay, well, this is where I find ourselves now, but where is it that you would like to be? Trying to work on some short-term goals as well as kind of more medium and long-term goals. And then, essentially Hope Economy trains people within churches to be money mentors, and a money mentor would help work out with someone what are their first steps. There's normally a next step that we can do to move towards financial well-being. And for different people, there might be 100 steps, that they need to take, and that's often where people are feeling really overwhelmed. Where do I start? But having someone sit with them and help them do the first step, the second step, the third step, and just put in a more bite-sized pieces can be super valuable and transformational.
We touched earlier on that aspect of control that some people are trying to find, with their money, and it's definitely probably really relatable, that kind of want to have control over all of these sorts of things. If you've got that desire for control, how would that be reflected in the way that you use your money?
Well, I think that, again, this would come through questions. It would come through feeling like, why do I feel like I need to spend? Why do I feel like I need this certain thing? I think that probably we all, like as a human condition, we seek control to control our circumstances. And so we probably all could say that we've got a tendency to want to control our circumstances by the things that we buy or the circumstances that we put ourselves in, whether that be where we live and schools that we put our children in. And I think that to a certain extent, we do a really good job of being under this illusion that we are in control, but then something difficult happens or unexpected happens, maybe a bereavement or, kind of things that come into our life, and we realise, maybe I'm a lot less in control than I thought I was. And so it's normally when those things happen that we suddenly realise, oh, I'm not as in control in this situation as maybe I thought I was. And that can help us, just ask questions. How do I live open-handed? How do I put my trust in the things that I want to put my trust in? And, recognising where it's healthy to, want to provide for our families and we want to put food on our table. So it's not disengagement from society. It's how do I engage with that in a way that reflects how I want to engage in the world. And for those of us that follow Jesus, how do we do that in a way that reflects his love for our community.
And the approach that Hope Economy are bringing into this, of course, is a hopeful one. It's right there in the name. What would it look like to design our budget from a hopeful perspective and not a fearful one?
I think that at the very centre, it's asking ourselves, well, what do we need? We do have things that we need, but then actually what maybe don't I need? And I think that if those of us that were able to could create margin in our budgets to look after people around us, then that would really help. Ultimately, I think Jesus invites us to be hospitable, to be generous, to be people that look out for the orphan or the widow. And we're not necessarily in the habit of living life slow enough to notice those people around us. And so I think creating a hopeful economy actually is an invitation for all of us to live a life that uses our time and our resources in a way that creates an atmosphere or a place that other people can benefit from, because we're actually kind of living for the purposes of those people around us. And if we're all contributing to that, then the kind of ecosystem in which we live would be feeling far more hopeful than the one that a lot of us experience day to day.
Sounds like such a great aim, Rosie. Thank you so much for sharing some of your insights. If people are wanting some support, if they want to engage with Hope Economy, how can we do that?
The best way to do that is to go and head to our website, which is hopeeconomy.org.au. On there, if you're interested in your church and you would like some support in this area, you can do that. If you'd like to be trained as a volunteer within your church, you can do that there. And if you're someone that's actually struggling and would like connecting with a money mentor, you can also do that on the website.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Undistracted. You can find more support, resources that Rosie mentioned through Hope Economy. And until next time, enjoy living this undistracted life.